heard some staggering, as we said, statistics. I keep saying staggering because they really are notable. 260 million reported cases and this number has gone down, right?
Yes.
So walk us through what are the most critical challenges happening in terms of malaria treatment and prevention?
Thank you, Anna, and welcome everybody. And so, according to the World Health Organization, there is a remarkable improvement from 700,000 to less than 600,000, let's say 500,000 deaths due to malaria, predominantly in the African region. And the highest or most vulnerable are adolescent girls who are pregnant. And this is really a socioeconomic and gender equality issue in the sense that it impacts women and basically on the income side. And the question, Anna, is that there's room to be effective. The affordable interventions are possible, and for to improve quality of healthcare. Challenge is it's not done early enough, and the numbers that who would like to see. There's a lot of room for improvement, especially in certain parts of the world. So that the main affected are children under the age of 5 years old. There's that, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, how and why, and what we can do.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. So let's just jump in there, Frank. I mean, what can we do? What can be changed when we look at access and distribution to better the situation? This is not on. Wait.
So this is a problem that we've been working on for some time, Anna. We've been working with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to look at multiple global health drugs. We've developed new process technology for HIV, malaria, and tuberculosis drugs, as well as all the COVID drugs. And what we found is that there's a lot of low-hanging fruit available to be able to reinvent the processes to make these drugs. And when you start looking at a lot of these global health drugs like malaria, about 50 to 70% of the cost associated with that drug is built into the active ingredients. And so if you can make a change and improve the active ingredient costs, it'll allow you to reduce the cost. It will then allow you to produce purchase more drugs with the same amount of money. So these are all opportunities. And the other thing that we were looking at, you mentioned earlier, was this issue about continuous manufacturing. It's not only the chemistry behind the problem, it's how you produce it. And we've been using the same technology basically to produce pharmaceuticals for the last 100 years without change. And
I'm sorry, that is just...
It's true. Historically, pharma companies have used batch manufacturing. And the analogy I'll make to you, it's like making spaghetti.
Yeah.
Okay, so a batch process is how you make spaghetti sauce. And that's a batch process. You dump all your ingredients in, you heat it up, you cool it down, you dump it out. A continuous process is how you make pasta, where you're continuously feeding the starting materials in and you're continuously taking the product out. Well, when you start thinking about it, the batch process is very labor intensive, and you can automate the continuous process. And so you can reduce your labor costs dramatically. But the other thing that's really important, one of the reasons why the FDA is important in this, is when you start thinking about it, every batch of spaghetti sauce tastes a little bit different, but all the pasta tastes the same. And it's the reproducibility of that allows you to be able to produce these drugs in a way that not only is cost effective and competitive, but also improves the quality of the product.
And you just mentioned this batch processing. What role does AI play in this process?
Oh, well, we're working on that right now. And so there's a lot of aspects that AI brings to the table. But basically what we're looking at doing is when you start thinking about drug manufacturing and our global vulnerability with regards to access to drugs, somewhere over 90% of the drugs that you consume every day, or that we all consume every day, is coming from either India or China. And we saw in the last pandemic that that results in a huge problem with regards to supply chain vulnerability. So what can we do to bring manufacturing back to our respective countries so that we could decentralize that and improve the supply chain? And the real opportunity is to use these continuous manufacturing platforms that will automate and allow us to use AI to control these processes in ways we haven't been able to do in the past and improve the cost as well as the quality of the products.
Yeah. Oh, which brings me to you.
Maybe I can just add a little bit there, Anna and Dr. Guptan. So in terms of access and distribution, there's two areas that we're going to work toward basically in terms of partnering with universities, which we've already been doing for the last 3 years or so.
This partnership, for example.
Partnership and collaboration, and the risk taking, the ability to take risk and have the funding or the financial support, as Dr. Guptan was able to elicit from or get from the Gates Foundation, which I want to highlight here. It's no easy task, very, very difficult, and you have to be probably the best in the world in terms of science. And they measure, they look for results. And Medicines for All and Dr. Guptan are one of the few probably in the world that have received second funding or subsequent funding, which again is a remarkable achievement. The distribution and access side, just to talk a little bit more about it, universities do not commercialize drugs, which most folks know here. They do great research, but they're not in the business of making a profit from the research. And that's where companies come in like Sapphire, and where we say, okay, this is great research. How can we really make a meaningful impact and bring this to the market? And in terms of the first step in R&D is the partnership with universities to really reduce the cost or reduce the risk of R&D. Bringing a new drug or a new molecule to the market today is around 2 billion or 2.4 billion. And only the big companies like the Pfizers of the world can do that. If it fails or doesn't work in phase 3 of the clinical trials, all of that money is gone. So it's a huge risk. What we're doing here is taking existing drugs, existing molecules, and basically repurposing them. They're drugs known to work, drugs in the market for the last 60 years or more, don't have toxicity issues. Just to come back there with the distribution point, partnering with the right local NGOs or right organizations is very, very important. Hospitals, in the markets that are most affected. In the case of malaria, it's the African region. It has nothing to do with GDP. If you actually look at it, the higher GDP countries have a bigger problem than the ones with the lower GDP. They're all trying to tackle it. The World Health Organization, they've done an amazing job of reducing the number of deaths. The percentage-wise, it's going down, but there's no reason why 500,000 or 600,000 children under the age of 5 need to die. Especially when these medicines are available pennies for pennies. So the right partnership, getting the right visibility and support from foundations like the Gates and others and agencies like WHO is important. And one of the reasons why that we wanted to be here is that we're driven by purpose, not by profit. We want to have meaningful profit, and you'll hear me say this again and again. It's our long-term view that I'm taking, our company, and we are at Sapphire, and we'll get a little bit more into the long-term view. That affects the distribution and the approach to distribution. Punching tablets is very easy, making tablets, but the raw material, the starting ingredient is key, and we plan on, with the support, of everyone here and WEF, and basically being able to offer or donate the certain number of kilos or product that's needed for the most vulnerable. And that's a commitment that we'll make. I know that was very long-winded on access and distribution, but
But it's important stuff. It's
Yeah,
important
yeah,
stuff.
right.
And I just wanted to back it up very quickly. You mentioned the relationships, these partnerships that can exist between corporate and academics. Because I'm sure in your work, Frank, you've been approached by numerous corporates and every people that want to take your technology and make money. What did Ramu say that was different? What did he say to you that made you say, okay, yes, let's do this?
Well, first of all, Ramu did his homework, and that was impressive to me. I get a long list of emails every day, but for good fortune was part of this because I opened up my emails in the morning and Ron Moose was at the top of the list, and it kind of intrigued me. So he said he was willing to come visit me, and I clicked him back and said, sure, come on. So then he proceeded to tell me about his mission. And the interesting thing about this was a drug that we had developed, a process for a drug that we had developed probably 5 years earlier, and had been sitting on the shelf. And
Why? Why was it sitting on the shelf?
well, it was a project that we were working on with the Department of Defense. It was called Pharmacy on Demand, and it was a unit about the size of a big refrigerator, and you could put the chemicals, the starting material chemicals into the machine. It would synthesize the active ingredient, formulate the drug, and pills would come out the back. And you could produce about 1,000 pills of Cipro a day with this. And the idea behind this was when troops go to places like Iraq and Afghanistan, they don't know what drugs they're going to need. So they'll overorder everything and then throw away 90% of it. With this unit, they could actually make it on demand and use it and consume it. And this was one of the drugs that we developed a process for the Department of Defense. It was hydroxychloroquine. So we published the results, we put a patent on it, and Ramon called me and he said, we'd like to use your patent to do something. And then the other thing that really kind of got me intrigued was the fact that the mission of what our institute does is to increase access to healthcare. So it checked that box too. And I think that those are probably the two things that said, come on down, let's talk. And then while we were there, he said, oh, by the way, so I'm speaking in Davos. Would you be willing to come to Davos with me? And this was in late November. My wife wasn't really that happy with that, but she acquiesced.
And you're here to share all of this, all of this exciting technology. Now, what role then does policy play in this?
Excellent question. And so when you talk about policy and advocacy, just to go back to what Dr. Guptan said, the trick of writing the email early in the morning is after you've been to 100 countries, you kind of learn how to relate to people and cultures. As I'm relating very much to the wonderful culture here, I've been to Switzerland many, many, many times. And every time I learn and the email, everything goes down in a day, in a world that we live in of attention. Like the 1 minute or 2 minutes makes a difference. And Zoom calls don't necessarily work, especially when you want to meet someone so accomplished. You have to be able to you have to be willing to make the effort when the purpose and the mission, you believe in it so much. And that's why I said, if I get the email back, we're definitely going down there and we're going to sit down. And even if it's 15 minutes, we're going to go and talk in person, right? Coming back to policy and advocacy, I'll just share a little bit about the generic business and the pharma industry. Highly regulated, as all of you know. It's for safety. It's for the, public safety. But in any regulation or bureaucracy or politics, there's a lot of things that can be improved, but it takes time. When you talk about clinical studies or you talk about the regulatory framework, Europe has a certain set of guidelines, Asia has a certain set, the US has a certain set, and folks follow kind of the US FDA as the gold standard. There's a lot of things happening in terms of harmonization, but that's all focused on the high value, high profit drugs. It's focused on, hey, can I charge $1,000 here or $10,000? If you look at oncology or cancer treatment, most people go broke. It's unfortunate because those treatments cost a lot of money. Coming back to malaria, it's kind of ignored. It's like, most of the world is not suffering, but 200 million or 263 million new cases a year is a pretty big number. As you mentioned, and the number of deaths is equivalent to like Vermont or Wyoming. The specific things is really to promote awareness and reach policymakers. One of the reasons why we're here. A lot of world leaders, policymakers, agencies are here. We want to sit down with them and say, hey, we're here to help the most vulnerable population, which is young women that have socioeconomic challenges. We want to collaborate with foundations like Sandoz, Bayer. Dr. Gupta and I have worked with most of these companies in our previous life and have a good track record. They're happy to sit down and talk to us. They have the money. How do you actually get that solution? Education to policymakers is very, very important. and minimizing the regulation. As a circumstance like during COVID, that the regulation was basically, we have to do emergency use approval. Government can do that. If a country like Nigeria or any other, Ghana, if they say, this is a proven molecule, 60 years of toxicity, some company and an organization is willing to donate or willing to bring this medicine, then we'll partner with the right local agency there and make it happen. The on this point, what I'll say is the right collaboration is very important, and measuring for meaningful results. What happens is that a lot of people want to do a lot of good, but there's no follow up, and there's no, okay, did that tablet, did it really reach the right parent? And was that parent educated enough to understand that this is not a cultural issue? This is not a flu, or this is not something where 2 weeks you can ignore, which is what leads to the mortality. After 3 days, 5 days, or whatever, you need to go see some practitioner. So it's a lot of it has to, as was done for HIV, it was a major education effort.
Thanks, Ramu. That reminded me, it's not just global health drugs. One of the things that we're working on right now is with rare diseases, because this is a huge unmet need, but it's for a small population. We're working on a drug right now. It's for a disease called urea cycle disorder. It's the inability to process ammonia, and it's screened for all newborns. And if you don't start taking the medication right away, it causes brain damage. And if you don't take the drug within a couple of days, the infant dies. Okay, but it's only about 1,000 patients a year. The cost for one patient for 1 year for a family is $800,000 out of pocket.
What?
Okay, so what's happening is the parents will mortgage their houses, and then they'll apply for a liver transplant to save the infant. That drug doesn't cost more than about $1,000 a kilo to make.
$1,000 a kilo to
The
make.
most important thing is a kilo, and you can punch a lot of tablets with a kilo.
So these are where the opportunities
So what?
are.
Okay. So what is happening, Frank? what is that big? Is it a supply chain issue?
I think it is a supply chain issue, in part. But the problem you have is it's this ecosystem that we've evolved into that's created these issues, because pharma companies, they're beholden to shareholders. And the problem you have is this is a huge risk. If you take $2.4 billion and you don't come up with a product for it, you have to be accountable to your shareholders.
Because that's the average cost of developing a
Exactly.
drug is $2.4 billion.
And that doesn't speak to all the ones that have failed along the way. And so this then becomes an issue of risk management. So pharma companies, as Ramu was saying, are set up to be able to absorb some of these costs because they have high margins. And the problem you have is, and so I have a good friend of mine who basically wrote our national healthcare program for Senator Grassley, and she was telling me, she said, Frank, if we do something differently to disturb this ecosystem, we'll stop getting new drugs because the risk and reward won't be balanced anymore. So there are all of these issues that exist with new drug manufacturing, but what Ramu's focused on now is existing drugs, where basically he's de-risked those molecules by having all of this toxicology data from their use in other applications. So this is a huge opportunity to look at this whole landscape differently.
So walk us through this de-risking. How does
So two things on the de-risking side. We still have to kind of placate to investors or shareholders, whether you're a private company or a public company. So there needs to be a balance that needs to be achieved. And basically the way that we're looking at achieving the balance is there are current indications or current problems that we can solve with the technology, with the chemistry, with the green chemistry. We can address malaria, we can address lupus, we can address, these are autoimmune or inflammatory diseases. The same molecule that's been in the market for 60 years, We'll be able to make that and based on scale. And the generic business or the pharma business is a race to the bottom, especially the generic drug business. Everyone competes, and it's a race to the bottom in terms of cost. So here's where technology and AI, I'll just kind of elaborate here a little bit. Here's where this is very important and being able to utilize it the right way. You need to be able to not make it in 1 ton. We have to be able to make it in 1,000 metric tons so that no one else will compete with you, even for current indications. So the revenue will start coming in from existing, whether it's lupus or rheumatoid arthritis, where we'll be able to actually donate or be able to subsidize malaria and other treatments, mainly because there's already a reasonable profit in these other indications. The financing or the investor perspective is that they're looking at women's health and they're looking at other major unmet future indications. An example, endometriosis. 1 in 9 women of childbearing age suffer from endometriosis. And these are hundreds of millions of women. It's not like just 1 million, 10 million. So our idea is be able to balance and say to the market and the investor, yes, you will have your reasonable profit, but what we want to do is be able to implement our mission and vision and deliver these essential medicines, life-saving medicines, make it accessible, make it affordable. And the strategy is basically, the higher margins are for regulated markets. That's typically what every Indian generic company has taken the view, and subsidize it for the other markets in need, especially for malaria. And if you take a look at markets like, or if you look at like the African region. So that's kind of like and the transparency and affordability. Many people have already started doing that, like Mark Cuban in the US, Cost Plus. You can go on there and he says, here's what it costs, 20%.
I'm laughing, Ramu, because Cuban's group called me about a few months ago, and he was at the top of the email list in the morning too. And they were working on this drug to treat urea cycle disorder and asked if we could help them with that. I mean, it's amazing how all of these things just kind of represent unique opportunities within an ecosystem. The thing you were mentioned earlier about large-scale manufacturing and centralized manufacturing. You have to kind of look at the individual application in order to be able to understand the best way to address it. Ramu's exactly right. With many of these examples, that's the case. But there are examples where you're going to want to use decentralized manufacturing. And back in the United States, I guess it was in the fall, we had a big hurricane. And it wiped out all of our our saline manufacture for the United States. And if you can think about what goes on in the hospitals, that's like electricity. Virtually every patient that comes into the hospital takes saline. So we're using that continuous technology that we've developed to actually work with companies to build a containerized cargo unit that will allow us to drop it into the hospital system and allow them to make their own saline continuously.
That's so exciting. Where are you with this in this process?
Well, we started about a month ago.
Oh, okay.
But what was interesting was it was a company that started out of our labs, on-demand pharmaceuticals, that was making these refrigerator-type continuous manufacturing operations. And they came to me and they said, well, we want to work with you on some of the drugs that we developed. And I said, well, can you make saline out of it? And I knew that they could because we had plotted what the process should look like, and it was pretty similar to what they were doing. And they said, yeah. And I said, well, how quickly can you do this? He said, well, we're all FDA approved. We can do this in 90 days. And then if you, I didn't mean to interrupt, but if you demonstrate that you can do it here, you can do it at virtually every hospital in the United States. And these are examples of emerging technologies that are going to help us change the way we deal with access to all healthcare.
Mm-hmm. I already put my bid in with Dr. Gupta to license that or commercialize. I made the request. Going back to a little bit on AI and technology and pharma, because there's a lot of companies here and that we definitely want to meet up with. most of the folks that go to these prestigious institutions, I have a cousin of mine who taught at Stanford, a professor. He said everyone comes here and says, you know what, we want to deliver the fastest pizza app, okay, and make a lot of money. So what are the problems we solved first? We solved, like, if you talk about platform technologies, how to deliver pizza. You could deliver pizza faster in India than saving someone's life. If you call the ambulance will come 30 minutes after the pizza guy. Now that's pretty sad. So where's our priority? When we talk about AI, it's about better finding the right patient, whether it's for rare diseases, whether it's for malaria, whether it's for endometriosis. How do you utilize AI? Better patient selection will help reduce your risk in phase 2 and phase 3. Now that means data has to be shared. Most healthcare companies and what they call prescription benefit management companies and insurance companies and hospitals, they don't like to share data. So AI can do great, as all the panelists said, if you can get the data. So this is where government and policymakers have to say, hey, listen, you have to share the data. We have very big companies in the US, one or two, like Epic, Cerner. They have the data. But if you can't get the patient data, how can we find who's suffering from lupus, who's suffering from, and half of the challenge or the money goes into finding the patient. And then that's why a phase 2 study costs like maybe 10 million and a phase 3, 30 or 40 million for our project, small project. This is where the 2.4 billion comes in. So if all of our global shapers and young minds and thinkers, they focus on not becoming unicorns by delivering pizza and focusing on, hey, can we get technology to really find who needs the medicine and how do you actually get it to them? And they're actually the folks for the studies and who also need the medicine. So this is, I just wanted to touch on the fact of AI. And many companies, they raise $500 million in 3 days. Okay, that's great. What are you going to do with the $500 million? It's a $5 or $6 billion valuation. That's also great. What are you going to do?
Well, I mentioned earlier that we were using AI, but we're using it also in a different way. Those of you who went through the COVID pandemic recognize the vulnerability of our supply chain, and that by centralizing that manufacturing in India and China, it cut the rest of the world off to health, essential medicines. And not just that, but even if we brought the medicines part of it back, all those key starting materials that are used to make those drugs are currently being made in places like India and China. So how do you take that whole supply chain and re-engineer it? And one of the ways we're doing it is with AI. We're looking at the processes that we use to synthesize the active ingredients, and we're saying, okay, let's look at all the different routes that we can use to make that molecule, and then identify the ones that have domestic building blocks that are used to make them. And then that way, we can actually figure out ways to have a sustainable supply chain for making those essential drugs.
And one thing I want to come back to that we mentioned in the introduction, which was the reduction of the carbon footprint of these processes, which is also really exciting what you've been able to do.
Yeah, so if you start thinking, it's a good point, Anna. We tend to neglect these things while we're looking at the end game and not thinking about all the different steps along the way. Pharma processes generate huge volumes of organic waste. To produce 1 kilogram of an active ingredient, you generate several hundred kilograms of organic waste. And the reason for that is that these are multi-step processes. So say you have a 5 or 6 step process to make a drug, and you're running the reactions in a solvent, and they isolate every intermediate along the way. And the fact that they're isolating these intermediates, they don't want to recycle the solvent because they're afraid of reintroducing impurities into the system. And so they burn it. So the mass of the solvent represents about 75% of the mass of the whole reaction mixture. So what we did was we said, why do people isolate intermediates? It's because the chemistry doesn't work. They generate byproducts, and so they have to remove these impurities from the process. So what we said was, let's improve the chemistry so that we don't generate the impurities, so we don't have to isolate the product. So I'll give you an example. We took this principle and applied it to an HIV drug, this one that we developed when I was in the industry called nevirapine. It had a carbon footprint of about 85 kilograms of waste per kilogram of product. We reduced it to 4. And we did it using these simple principles. And if you can improve the chemistry to produce the drug, then you have the opportunity to not only reduce costs, but improve the environmental impact on the processes.
And financially, it makes sense.
For sure, definitely. It's a very, very competitive. And Dr. Guptan, on our first meeting, just to add some light humor, he was explaining the chemistry process to me. And I came home, shared with my wife, I said, organic chemistry and chemistry was not my best subject. And I was like, if he only knew my grade in college on chemistry. But everything is divine. God is great. You meet the right people at the right time in your life when your purpose is, right. So we're happy to be here. And just on the financial structure or economic structure or the pressures, the reason why a lot of the manufacturing of pharma industry was outsourced was for pollution and was from a labor point of view, cost of labor. That's why it went to India and China. I myself worked with the large pharmaceutical companies like Merck, moved a product called ivermectin over to India. Animal health, it's a deworming product, same used in animals as well as in humans. And the times have changed now where the size of the facility doesn't matter. You could make 2 billion tablets in a 10 by 10 room with one machine in a matter of a couple of days. You can punch out 1 million tablets in probably less than an hour. All the equipment is there, whether it's Japanese, German, all the technology is there. Do you have the vision? Are you motivated by purpose and not profit or reasonable profit? That's what it comes down to.
Yeah, if I could just add something to that, Remy, because this is a really important initiative that we're doing right now. I mentioned the COVID pandemic and the issue about what's going on in Africa. If you look at where Africa is with regards to healthcare, this is an epicenter for all kinds of diseases. 85% of all the HIV patients, most of the malaria patients, most of the tuberculosis patients. Some of you may or may not know, but there's a tuberculosis epidemic out there, and there's a resistant strain of TB that most drugs aren't treating. And it's in Asia and Africa. And we were asked to look at a way to remake a drug to treat tuberculosis. And we're transferring that process over to Africa now because when the pandemic hit, they couldn't get any of these drugs. So they're going to be in a position to be able to make their own drugs and become self-sufficient as a result of this.
And countries are using medicines as kind of like also warfare, and not just economic. During pandemics, and they basically say, oh, you know what, I'm not going to give you the vaccine, or I'm not going to give you this particular molecule. That happened, and that's why the Department of Defense funded this particular molecule for research. They said, we don't want to be in this situation again, being such an advanced nation in the US, where we have to go ask somebody, hey, can you please give me this, when you can actually make it there. This may not be protocol, but I'll just give a quick shout out to the audience.
Please do.
Thank you, and Mr. Martin Cabrera from Cabrera Capital is here. Thanks, Martin, for making the time and joining us here. Our CFO and his dear friend, Luis Restrepo, is also here. And just, maybe it's out of protocol, but since it's on camera, so I just wanted to let everybody know there. And over to you, Anna, there.
Wonderful. Before we close out, does anyone have any questions or any comments or any concerns? Now that we have these two experts up here, speak now or forever hold your peace. You can always approach them after, of course, because they will be around for just a moment. So I think during the conversation we heard more than one call to action. But if you really want, what is it you really want to leave the audience with here today, Frank?
That's a good question, Hannah. I that changes every day for me from the standpoint of where we want to be. I think that the point is, I think if you start looking at where the opportunities are, and I think I might have mentioned this to you, it's about the transfer of knowledge. And, I turned 74 this year, and I I'm so fortunate to be here doing this, because what I'm doing is I'm transferring information to my students and postdocs about what not to do, so they can make new mistakes. And in doing that, the expectation is, with the knowledge that we've given them, they need to push the envelope and make new mistakes, because that's what's going to get us from where we are today to where we need to be in the future.
I guess a closing thought that I'll leave everybody with here is that you have to stick to what you believe and your purpose, and say, this is what I believe, and we're going to make it happen. Just with us announcing the project and moving forward, I've gotten numerous calls and emails. Would you just like to, sell the product, sell the company? And it's very big numbers. Normally you'd be like, oh yeah, you know what, makes sense. And you have to stick to your purpose. There's a lot of great things that we're planning to do. If anyone is in the great state of Virginia, please do visit the lab. It's an amazing facility. I personally have been to over 100 countries. I've looked at and worked with and audited some of the best labs and facilities in the world. And I have to say, this is very, very top grade. And that's why the Gates Foundation is supporting the scientists, the researchers. They need a good mentor, good transfer of knowledge, as Dr. Guptan said, not to make the same mistakes, right, and maybe make new mistakes. But I was very impressed and grateful that I was able to. The other thing with pharma companies that they do is they won't let you in, and they're like, it's top secret. Like semiconductor, you need like presidential clearance to go. And you're like, wait a second, it's all the nature of competition with the equipment. And that transparency and that openness is very, very welcoming. We'll be here again, and next time around, we'll say, there's how many lives we changed, and here's how many lives we saved. That number, working with WHO and other foundations, we hope to bring that down to 100,000. It's very ambitious from where we are today, around 595,000, particularly in malaria. The price point or the affordability of the medicine is there. We have to get it to the right people through education, through policy, and through support of good work that Inkwell and all of the folks here are doing.
And if I could just add one other thing, Anna, thank you for the real thoughtful questions that you prepared for us.
Yes, and
yes. Honestly, I almost didn't even get to ask them, because you both got into such a great conversation and hitting all the points that it really took on a life of its own. So thank you for being such great guests, if I may.
Yes.
Thanks for your insight and your time.
Big shout out, and thank you, Anna, for guiding us and being the moderator here. Very, very appreciative. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
You.